In today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast, we are joined by Laz Jackson. We are joined by Sean Corp. We're going to be talking about the Detroit Pistons starting lineup. We'll talk about a specific combination of Cade, Ausar Thompson, Jalen Duren. Can that combination work? If not, why not? We'll talk about all that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Ku Cahill. You can find me over on Twitter at Ku Cahill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today is going to be a fun episode. So just letting you guys know, you guys probably listened to part one at this point. We're going to be splitting it up in two parts. I know you guys like the multiple part episodes. So we're going to have a part two. Stay tuned for that. But we are joined by Laz Jackson and Sean Corp, both with DBB. It's kind of like a crossover here we're having. It's super fun one. I can't wait for it. So how are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Laz, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Excited to be here. Happy to be here. Thanks again, Ku, for having me on.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So just to give a little peek behind the curtain of how this got started. So I was talking with Laz about, hey, Laz, can you come on the podcast at any time? And we were kind of talking about it. And then Sean, you helped me out finding some stats that I wanted to. There was a discussion that kind of got brought up with my episode a few days ago with Jack Kelly. We were talking about the starting lineup, and there were some numbers that I wanted to find. I just couldn't find what site to use, and Sean kind of helped me find those stats. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? Let's just have a big crossover. I think it would be a fun conversation. You guys were obviously dope enough to agree on a time and join the podcast, so I appreciate you guys. But I've told them before we start recording, this is going to be a free-flowing podcast. There's no strict segments for how, what topics. We're just going to let it go. So we're going to start in this area, and we'll probably end up with the starting lineup. But what I want to start with is the trio of Cade, Ausar, and Duren. And I've heard some thoughts from both you guys on this. I think my listeners have heard some of my thoughts on it as well. So I'll let you guys go first. The Cade, Ausar, Duren trio is something that I think long-term they obviously hope can play together. But the question obviously is, can they play together this year? So we'll dive further into it, but I just want to get you guys' brief thoughts on it before we really get into it. Laz, Sean, whichever one you guys want to go first. Go right ahead and just what's your thoughts on that trio?
I want to defer to Sean. I want to hear what Sean has to say.
My initial thought is that we already have evidence they can work together even when they're playing with suboptimal talent around them. So I'm not saying they're good or great, and they're certainly young enough where they're not what they're going to be 2 years from now. But they're not so bad that it's a non-starter, which we've seen plenty of lineups with the Pistons where there's combos on the floor. It's a complete non-starter. It's a waste of time. That's not what this is. There's elements that work and work well together. So I think they can work with other smart complementary pieces. Certainly worth investing the time in.
I definitely think it's a look I would use throughout the course of the season. I wouldn't use it as the starting lineup, or it wouldn't be my base level look, I'll say. The thing I've said multiple times is that this season is about finding out how good Cade is, or what level Cade is at, and that being the thing that will drive the team forward. And I think right now the putting Cade on the floor with two non-shooters after everything that Trajan Langdon has done this offseason just doesn't seem like it's going to be the main thing they do. And so while I think that in the long term, you're absolutely going to have to figure out if those three guys can play together along with a Ron Holland or a Jaden Ivey or whatever, then but for this season, for this particular spot in time and for the starting lineup in general, I don't think that's the direction they want to be headed in.
All right, so I want to bring these numbers up that Sean helped me find. And the reason why I wanted to find out these numbers, because I've been one of the people, and we're going to get into the starting lineup eventually, obviously, but I've been one of the people that the starting lineup that I'm probably leaning most into wanting to see does involve having those three on the floor together. It's a Cade, Ausar, Simone, Tobias, Duren lineup. That's the starting lineup I think would do the best. But I wanted to find out. I listened to the shout out Bryce Simon and Sam's podcast. I was listening to their podcast, and they discussed. I think Sam was mentioning like you cannot play Ausar and Duren with Cade. You just can't do it. Just don't do it. And there were some numbers that I know already about within like 120 minutes when you played them with Simone. They had like a +4 net rating, but it was with a great defense and not a good offense. It was like I think it was like 18th in the NBA offensively, or like 20th around there offensively, but it was like a top 5 defense like rating. Now it was only 120 minutes, very small sample, but like something there. So I was like, okay, well, what's Cade's numbers actually with them? I really want to know, like, does that combo actually like weigh Cade down to a point where it's just like, okay, you're really hurting him. So Sean, again, like I said earlier, he really helped me out to find these numbers. So I just want to read these numbers and we'll get back into it. So Cade with Ausar and Jalen Duren on the floor. He averaged 24 points, 7 point, and this is per 36. 24 points, 7.3 assists to 3.9 turnovers, 4.5 rebounds, field goal percentage, 45%, 3-point percentage of 35%. So I'd say fine numbers. Those are pretty impressive. With Ausar on and Duren off, you're at 20 points and 7 assists, 3.1 turnovers, 4.1 rebounds, field goal percentage of under 40% and 39%, and 3-point percentage of 32.3%. And actually let's see if I can, let me see if I can share the screen for those watching on YouTube as well, so they can just see the stats I'm reading. There you go. You can see that, right? So the numbers, I just read the numbers with Ausar on and Duren off. So then you got the numbers with Cade, with Duren and Ausar off. You got 25.2 points a game, 9.4 assists a game, 3.3 turnovers, 5.0 rebounds. You have 45 field goal percentage, 37% 3-point percentage. And then with both of them off and just Cade alone, you got nearly 27 points a game, 7.8 assists, 4.5 turnovers, 5.3 rebounds, 47% field goal percentage with 35 3-point percentage. And if you scroll down just a little bit and then we'll move on, I want to hear from you guys. If you look at the net rating, you got with Cade, Ausar, and Duren on the floor, a minus 1.7 net rating. When you take Duren off and only Ausar on, it goes dramatically to a minus 10.4. With Duren on, Ausar off, you got minus 7.6. And with both of them off the floor with just Cade, it's a minus 13.5. So we'll stop sharing the screen now. Whichever one of you guys want to go first, what do you guys get from those numbers?
My first reaction when I was putting all of that together was, this is just really clear evidence that Ausar is probably not going to start the season. And, you're optimizing offense. You're trying to optimize Cade. The numbers are pretty clear. And I think it also hints at giving Duren a little bit more credit offensively than what a typical fan's going to do, because I don't think fans really reckon with how much his gravity is integral to a functional offense. But that little extra addendum kind of made me do a double take as well, because those are pretty legitimately interesting net rating numbers. And so the real conundrum, the question is, what kind of lineup can you build that would allow you to use Ausar's defense while living with his offense? I don't know if it's possible, but it's certainly got me intrigued.
Yeah, the thing that immediately stood out to me was that Cade plus big plus shooting, which if Ausar is not on the floor, we can presume that there's a bit more shooting on the floor, is like that jumped the assists from like in the 7 range to like the 9.5 range. And it jumped his shooting from like the 35% range to the 39% range from 3. And like those are the numbers I am paying attention to, right? If Cade is acting as acting as his own spacing and getting other spacing threats in the lineups, like he turns from a 7.5 assists per game guy to like a 9.5 assists per game guy. That's huge. Like that's extra offense for everybody else. And distribution is one of his big strengths, and something that I think he doesn't get necessarily enough credit for, just because his teammates haven't been able to knock down shots. And so seeing that reflected, like, hey, if you give this guy a roll threat and some shooters, like we can get to like 25 and 9, and like those are, close to bordering on all-star numbers, then yeah, it just makes it seem even more likely that Ausar is not going to be the guy who starts. Now, the thing with the net ratings is, like, yes, all those net ratings are negative, which is in and of itself like not that great. But I think that with a better supporting cast, you'll see some of those net ratings improve this season, and with some development from both Duren and Ausar.
Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you'll get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers at ebaymotors.com. So my biggest takeaway from those numbers, it kind of confirms a little bit what I thought. Whereas like Ausar and Duren together don't immediately sync everything if you have shooting around them, where it's like you can, at least for me, it's like I feel like you can craft a lineup around them that's, at least there's some evidence that tells you it can work. Like it can happen. However, like Sean said, the next thing that really jumped out to me was like, okay, Ausar really was like just sinking the spacing of offense when he was on the floor without that, like, I guess creativity with lineup structure, you would call it. I don't know if it's that creative. You just put shooting around them, but like it was creative for last year.
Too creative for Monty.
Yes. But I think like Sean said, Ausar really was just a negative spacer, and he really hurt them offensively. I think along with him not shooting, the way they used him also just doubled down at making it just doubly worse as well. However, the next thing that I wanted to ask you guys about that was one of the takeaways I had from here was, if you look at all the Pistons' best defensive lineups, every single one of them have Ausar in it. And the fact that they have a minus 1.7 net rating is not because their offense was great with both of them on the floor. It's because Ausar just transforms their defense to where they're like, oh God, they're actually a good defense. And it kind of, tries to outweigh the offense. Mm-hmm. And then the numbers, like I brought up, I have them in front of me here. Let me share this screen too, so anyone on YouTube can see it as well. Right here, PBP stats. You guys should be able to see that now. If you look at the numbers with Jalen Duren, Cade, Simone, and Ausar on the floor, they played 134 minutes, have a plus 4.0 net rating with a 113 offensive rating and a 108.9 defensive rating. Now, I believe the defensive rating would be like second in the NBA if it was like over the whole season. And then the offensive rating was like, I think 20th, around there. So we can stop this screen sharing with that. But my takeaway was, okay, if you put shooting around them, there's reason to believe it. 2, Ausar transforms your defense and like gives you a reason to believe, like as a rookie, was already good enough defensively to like carry a lineup on that end. And my last takeaway was, I agree with you, Laz, that it kind of shows that Cade offensively himself goes to another level when he just has shooting and lob threat next to him, which I think a lot of people like. I feel like it was, kind of known to everyone, maybe besides the Pistons for the last 3 years. But my concern is like the defense falls off a cliff. And can you trust, like, I guess the next like part of the conversation goes to, could you mention, Laz, that like seeing Cade really take that next step and see where he's at will equate to like team success? I guess my question is there reason to believe that maybe going that lineup, going that type of route may elevate Cade, but may be so bad defensively that it doesn't actually equate to success because of where Duren's at defensively? Because I think Ausar, we'll eventually get into the starting lineup, I'll explain why the lineup I liked. But I think you see with Ausar, I'm sure it's probably the same with Stu somewhat. Like Stu helps him defensively. I haven't looked at those numbers, but with Ausar, you can see that he himself is really carrying for Duren defensively. And when you take him off Duren, I think we all agree was just so bad defensively. I agree with you, Sean. I think he's insanely good offensively, but is he so bad defensively where even if it's elevating Cade to that level you're talking about, Laz, is it possible that it may still bring the team down because of how bad defensively they'll be? It's not like, and also it's not like they brought in, OG Anunoby as like a 3-and-D guy. They got Tobias, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think that the other thing I do remember was that a lot of those minutes were early on in the season when they were playing Ausar, Stu, and Duren together. And the Stu Duren combination was like really good defensively, if I remember correctly. And that was partially because of the way they played, right? Like Stu and Ausar were one of the few guys on the teams last year who could keep the ball in front and like make guys take tough shots. And Duren is not he's a below average like positional defender right now, but he is a really good rebounder. And so like if you can make guys miss shots by staying in front, like Duren can help clean up the glass and like you can end possessions that way. So like the theory of it like makes sense on defense. What I'll say is that with the talent they've added this offseason, I don't see them like those like Stu Duren lineups or those Ausar Duren lineups just aren't lineups I think they'll be using very often. And so now it becomes a matter of like, okay, like yes, Simone and Tobias like aren't as good as Ausar on defense, but will putting in another like two good size like multi-positional wing defenders who are vets with experience, know where to be positionally. Tobias is not like, neither one of them is like an amazing athlete, but they're both like perfectly fine NBA athletes, like can stay in front, can play good team defense. Like, will that be enough of a baseline defensively that you get like okay defense and like the good Cade led offense, right? Like that's what I'm hoping for, I guess, from lineups this season, is like just enough defense to like be okay, while Cade plus shooting like shoots your offense into the stratosphere.
So, Sean, before you tag in real quick, I just wanted to back up some of the stuff Laz was talking about with some numbers. So this is the Ausar Thompson, Jalen Duren, and Isaiah Stewart trio. When they are all three on the floor, they had a minus 9.0 net rating, offensive rating 107, and a defensive rating 116. With Duren and Ausar, they had a 109 net rating or 109 offensive rating and a 110 defensive rating. They had a minus 0.4 net rating in 343 minutes. And then with Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart on the floor with Ausar off, it was a plus 0.3 net rating. Their offense was way better, 116.03, but their defense was a 115.6. So I don't know if you want to read into any of that, but since you brought it, I just wanted to throw it up there while you were talking about it to kind of help you out and back you up what you were saying. But go ahead, Sean. Go ahead and tag in.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of reinforce Laz's point, we're talking about the players that are still here when really we got to consider the players who are gone and how much they hurt the team. Because, I mean, the Pistons are not good. They will not be good. But all those guys were so damaging last year. They either couldn't play either end of the floor or played one end and gave more than everything else back on the other. So, like, Tobias Harris, not a great defender. Way better than Bogdanovich, better than Alec Burks. Like, that is being replaced with competence. Like, I think we just have to reckon with having a little bit more competence than we've had for a while. And, I've been messing around with these lineup combinations since we were talking, Koo. And if you have Cunningham, Stewart, and Ivy, who we don't call a shooter nor a defender, and Duren on the floor, they got a net rating that's positive. If you swap out Stewart and Ausar, they still have a positive net rating. Like, that base is fine. It's just what you put around them. And then it's also having actual depth. So that doesn't mean you have to play all those young guys. It means they know how to play basketball and somewhat can work well together, in spurts. It's not a non-starter. So whether they want to optimize offense or optimize defense or just have a Swiss Army knife of perfectly whelming play from Tobias Harris, that's good because it helps everybody else on both ends of the floor kind of click into their more natural pecking order of what is expected of them.
So
yeah, and I think JB will, and I think the JB Bickerstaff will focus on defense, right? That's something we've seen from him classically in his stops in Houston, Memphis, and Cleveland. Is that's something he prioritizes, and so I don't know if that's something that we'll see from a lineup perspective. I've been thinking about that lineup that you mentioned at the beginning, Ku, the Cade, Ausar, Tobias, Simone Duren lineup as like that's like an interesting like blend in my mind. But at the same time, like the way I've been thinking about it is I always want like one of Simone and Tobias on the floor at all times for this team, just because I don't really want to be playing two bigs, and I don't really feel comfortable like playing Stu and Paul Reed together at the start of the season. I'm curious, but like I don't think that's something they're going to go with right away. And a starting lineup that has like all three of your three best wings in it is like makes it tough to like play not all three of those guys at the same time. Like unless Ron's going to play more than I think, or unless like somebody like Bobby is going to play more than I think, is like playing all three of those guys together means there's going to be times when like only one of them is on the floor. And like, I think like lineups, like one way or another, are going to suffer the fewer of those guys you can put on the floor. So I'd rather just like kind of spread them out a little bit as opposed to like really focus in on like a starting lineup like that.
So before we move forward, I just want to say I've quickly realized like my favorite part of this, like having a 3-person podcast, everyone can see like my Blue's Clues notebook in the back now. So, like, I looked up and I was like, while you were talking, I looked up, I was like, oh, you can actually see like my whole little presentation back there. You can see Woody, Buzz, Hooper with like you can see that my whole little reel back there. So that just had to point that out real quick. But something I think you mentioned it last. I said this on the podcast a few times. If the team and it's really interesting to me how they're going to do this, because like if they want to be good this year, which I question just how good they really wanted to be this year.
That's kind of an open question as we like discuss all this, right? It's
I think the question is how good do they want Cade to look? Yeah.
Or it's like how good do they want to be and win, right? Like, do you want to start the season hot? I know we talked about the schedule looking kind of rough for the first like 10-ish games, but like after that things settle down. So it's like, do you want to start the season off on the right foot or not? And which lineups are going to be more conducive to that, right?
So yeah, I completely agree. I got the first 10 games. Fans hate me for why I said what happened in the first 10 games. So I mean, this is what it is. But I bring that up because like depending on if they want to be as good as they can be, like I think it's very clearly this is an offensive roster, so you need to lean into offense. Like you don't have defensive personnel, but you have a defensive head coach that doesn't have defensive personnel, has offensive personnel. So that's something I'm really just like paying attention to. Like, okay, how is that going to balance itself? Like the optimistic view is, okay, well, you have the offensive players and just let the coach worry about the defense and he'll get the most out of them defensively. That's the optimistic view. Maybe that's what happens. But then the other side is, okay, you have a defensive-minded coach with an offensive roster. Will he know how to utilize an offensive type of offensive personnel when he doesn't have I would say probably what he would like on the roster. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would assume that he would probably rather have more defenders on the roster than he does. Like, I'm just going to assume that. But so I'm paying attention to that. Do you guys want to move on to starting lineups talk now, or is there anything else you guys wanted to bring up?
I mean, I think every lineup conversation really is geared toward where do you start, how do you want to end games, how do you balance and stagger. So I think starting lineups pretty natural next conversation.
All right, so let me give my defense for why I have my starting lineup, and then you guys can rebuttal and then give yours. Does that sound cool?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, so I want the Cade, Ausar, Tobias, Simone, whatever way you want to put Tobias 4, Simone 4, it doesn't matter, and Duren lineup for this reason. There's like two big reasons. There's multiple reasons, but there's two big reasons. One, I feel like that gives you the best balance of offense and defense. I feel like almost every other lineup you can come up with, you're either going all defense with whatever personnel you have, or you're going all offense with whatever personnel you got. I think that lineup gives you the best balance of, okay, we're going to have spacing, but we're not completely punting on the defensive side of the floor. I think that's reason number one. And reason number two is something that I've talked nonstop with Cannon, Cade's brother. And I've talked nonstop with Ashton, Cade's trainer, on the podcast. This isn't something like behind closed doors I'm like reporting or anything. Like, this is something when they were on the podcast. I've talked with them a little bit off the podcast, but it was on, like everyone saw it. It's just really confused me since the Pistons drafted Cade, because like one of the main positives of drafting a guy like Cade, who's a big point guard, it gives you versatility defensively to where you can run. Like, you don't have to have small players on the floor. Basically, you don't, like, now that your point guard's big, you don't need to have a small guy on the floor. So theoretically, having and teams do this all the time, but like with Cade, you can now have a lineup of all 6'6" and above, and now you're switchable defensively. You're switchable at least 1 through 4, and you have length all over the floor. You can play passing lanes a little bit more. You have more size on the floor, like all of that. And I just feel like they haven't even tried to take advantage of that, like at any point during Cade's tenure. I mean, there's a lot of things they haven't tried to take advantage of during
I was gonna say, like, that's low on the list.
Right. But it is something that I've been really confused about. Yeah. So with this lineup, you have everyone on the floor 6'6", 6'7", and above. You can switch across the board. You have length, you have size. Ausar is your best defender, so you can put him on the best guy on the floor, let him guard. And also, he's probably, like, him and his brother are probably the best rebounding wings guards in the league. So, like, you're not losing out on the boards either. You have Duren, who's a really good rebounder, plus you have Ausar, who's probably, again, like I said, probably 1, 2, or 3 rebounding wing or guard in the league. So you're not giving up anything on the glass. And then offensively, there's enough stats that give me belief that if you surround them with shooting, it can work. So, especially, I guess this is the last thing I'll give it to you guys. I've said before over and over, if you pre-draft, I was big on Ausar Thompson. You only draft Ausar, in my opinion, if you believe in his ability as a secondary playmaker. If you don't believe that he was going to become a secondary ball handler, if you don't believe that he was someone like what he showed at OTE as a ball handler, if you don't believe that was something that he could eventually do, then he's not a fifth overall level prospect, despite his athleticism, because he can't shoot. And he's obviously a really great defender, but what his swing skill set was his ability to run an offense, to be the point guard, secondary playmaking, his vision, his processing, that's his swing skill. So, like, if you didn't believe in that, you don't take him 5, in my opinion. If you take him 5, it's because you believe in that. So with that lineup, you're basically penciling him in as that secondary ball handler. You're getting those reps for him and then all the other stuff. So that's my defense for it. That's why I would go with it. Although, Laz, I will agree. I have pointed out that, like, you do have, like, all 3 of your wings. So you'd have to get creative with who you sub out first when you bring them back in. Like, you'd have to get creative with that. But I think that has the potential to be, like, their best lineup, in my opinion. So
I think I just trust Asar's handle less than you do at this point in time.
I don't trust it. Okay, so let me say that real quick.
Yeah.
That's why I've said I think that's his biggest area of improvement over his three-point shooting this offseason. I think if he improves his ball handling, that does more for me than his shooting. So if he can improve it this offseason, that's what I would go with. And I hope that's what he's, like, prioritizing. But if it's, like, the same handle as last year, like, yeah, then it becomes a little concerning. But I'd assume it's like not. But go ahead.
No, yeah, it's just, yeah, I don't currently, like, based on what we saw last year, I don't trust Ausar to be like that second side pick and roll guy. Even especially like the shooting is also a part of that. Like, I trust him as a passer. I liked Ausar better when they were treating him as a non-shooter, but he was, like, ghosting screens and, like, slipping into space and making decisions like with the ball in his hands, like moving towards the basket. I liked that role for him a lot better. I thought he was a lot better at that than he was at dribbling or, like, waiting in the corner while a guy sagged 10 feet off of him, right? And that lineup, the lineup that you're proposing, Ku, doesn't really give him as much opportunity to do the thing I think he's currently good at, which is why I'm, like, less in favor of it. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. And, like, you know, maybe Ausar shows up in training camp and he can, like, dribble and, like, okay, like, yeah, we can make some stuff happen. But yeah, that's just why I haven't been thinking about that lineup and that construction as much, I suppose. I'd be curious to see what Sean thinks, though.
I think my biggest struggle with the offseason has been my belief in Fontecchio didn't seem to match up with the organization's commitment and investment in Fontecchio. He was paid like a reserve wing player that can shoot, not a sort of young but kind of old secret starter that you really want alongside Cade for 4 years that can kind of give you enough on both ends. Like, that's how I see him, as like, he's just fine. You take him for his 4 prime years and then you can like re-sign him or move on at a lesser number. But they paid him for 2 years. They didn't pay him a ton. The market is what it was. Maybe he fought for fewer years so he could get back on the market and get paid again. But like, he's not being paid like a linchpin of a starting lineup. So I just have always kind of penciled him in for a very sort of high leverage, high use reserve role. So I haven't really factored him into starting lineup consideration.
All right, whichever one of you guys, my goodness, want to go with your starting lineup now that you guys would go with, and why, whichever one want to go first.
Yeah, I would. I said on the Hardwood Knocks podcast, my starting lineup would be Cade, Malik Beasley, Simone Tobias, and Duren. I trust Beasley's handle a little bit more than Ausar's at this point. Not that like he's going to be like a main offensive end or anything, but like he can take you can like set a screen for him. He can take one sidestep dribble. He can pull up, and I'm cool with that. I liked I think the Bucks overstretched Beasley as a defender last year, but that was partially because of who was in the backcourt with him. And so I think that Beasley is like he's an average NBA defender as for his position. And so I'm not necessarily worried about a lineup like that getting really destroyed defensively. And I think that's my ideal construction of Cade plus big plus 3 shooters in the starting lineup. So that's the lineup I've been going with so far.
So that's going to be a wrap on the first part of our episode with Laz and Sean. Tune in tomorrow for part 2 of our conversation with them. It was a really fun conversation. Make sure you guys stay tuned for it. I promise you, it was absolutely amazing. I loved it so much. It was a lot of fun. So stay tuned for part 2. Until then, I will see you guys later. Thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on our podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Stay tuned for part 2 tomorrow. Till then, I'll see you guys later. Peace out.